Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar, Getting Emotional About Your Marketing with Spotler and the lovely Katie Hart. So today we have Katie Hart is joining us today to talk about emotions within your marketing and how you can create engaging content and you can really, relate to people's emotions. So just a little bit about Spotler before we begin, before I hand over to Katie. For those of you who don't know, we are an AI-powered marketing automation suite. We work with marketers to help them improve their marketing as a whole. We are part of a larger global group, and what that means is we're able to offer an array of different marketing technologies and solutions to our clients to help improve their results, enhance their customer journey, and essentially bring all of their marketing activities and sales and customer service journeys together onto one platform. Next slide, please, Katie. So I'm Jess, I'm the marketing manager at Spotler, and as I said, we have Katie here today, which is very exciting. I will let Katie do her own intro, as I fear I won't do it justice. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just some housekeeping logistics. We will try and keep to 45 minutes for the webinar. We will make time at the end to do a live Q&A. So any questions that you do have throughout the webinar, please pop them in the question box on GoToWebinar, and we will make time for those at the end. You will receive a copy of the recording and the slides later on this afternoon as well. So for your reference for later on. So from email marketing, social media, website behavior and personalization, WhatsApp, live chat, we have a solution for most, whether it be B2B, B2C or e-commerce. And most recently, we've just brought on board a really great CRM software, which is very exciting. We're all really excited for that to happen. We can't wait to get into that space and enhance our MarTech offering. So we have worked with Katie many times now over the years, so it's great to be back together. The research that Katie does and the findings and the results are always really interesting, really insightful, and can help shape your marketing strategy. So on that note, I will hand over to Katie. I'll let her introduce herself. As I said, I fear I won't do you any justice. Over to you, Katie.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for that, Jess. Yes, my name is Katie Hart. I run my own neuromarketing organisation. I'm going to explain a bit about what neuromarketing is in a few moments' time. But just to reassure you that I know what I'm talking about, I have a master's degree in applied neuroscience, and I actually utilise this to apply the insights we've got from neuroscience to make our marketing more effective. So essentially, it's looking at what goes on in the brain as we and as our consumers go about their everyday lives, and how we can perhaps utilise that knowledge and those insights to make our marketing more effective. Today, we're going to be talking about emotions. Obviously, there's a huge wealth of knowledge within neuroscience that can help us in marketing. So we're just looking at a tiny slice of that today, and we're going to focus on emotions. So let's get underway with the presentation. This is your last chance. After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and the story ends. You wake up tomorrow in bed and you carry on believing whatever you want to believe. Or you take the red pill and the story continues, and I'll show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Now, I hope some of you have seen The Matrix, and I hope some of you are familiar with that quote from it, which is the choice that Keanu Reeves' character is offered. And it really is the same choice I'm offering you today, because once you start to see things through the neuromarketing lens, you can't go back. You will never be able to see things quite the same way again. So I hope you're going to stay with me for the duration of this webinar. I hope you'll enjoy the insights I give you. And I don't apologise for the fact that some of these might literally turn things almost 180 degrees for you. That is part of the exciting opportunity that neuromarketing gives us. So I'm going to start by just making you aware of how amazing this organ between our ears actually is. So it's only about the size of your two fists. If you put them together like that and think of that as being sort of inside your skull, that is roughly the size of your brain. And yet it contains 86 billion neurons. So there are 86 billion neurons in there connected to each other, and each one of those neurons on average is connected to 7,000 other neurons. So it's incredibly complicated, and that's why we are still learning so much about it. Neuroscience is progressing at a tremendous pace, but there are still a lot of things we don't know yet. Your brain weighs roughly 2% of your body weight, roughly. However, it consumes about 20% of the resources that come into your body. So every mouthful of air that you take down into your lungs, 20% of that oxygen will be consumed by your brain. The swig of coffee, everything you eat, 20% of all of that will be consumed by your brain. So it is very resource intensive. Operating those 86 billion neurons takes a lot of energy. And to replace that energy, we have to keep replenishing it and taking it in. So when you're thinking about your diet, always be mindful that 20% of that is going to be serving just your brain. 95% is a really key number, because 95% is what we believe is the volume of information which goes into making our decisions that we are not consciously aware of. 95% of what goes into the decisions we make is subconscious. So when we're doing our diligent market research and we're asking people why they've made the decisions they have, or perhaps why they've chosen brand A, or how much they would pay for brand B, we are at best interrogating 5%. The other 95%, they don't know. They can't give you that answer. They can try, they can retrospectively justify the decisions they've made, but we know that the huge volume of information about actually why they've made those decisions, why they've conducted those behaviours, is subconscious. And 11 million. I think as marketers, we need to be aware of this, because 11 million pieces of information is how much your brain processes every second. So it's 11 million, another 11 million, another 11 million. I can't even say it fast enough, but 11 million bits of information your brain is processing. And a large amount of that is the information that comes in through our eyes. So if we as marketers are trying to attract people's attention, we know that we're all in very busy, complex environments these days, and we might be second screening with lots of input, lots of information going on. The brain can process 11 million of those. And yet at best, only about 40, perhaps 50, if we're really clever, really lucky, 40 or 50 of those 11 million reach our conscious threshold. So everything else the brain is doing below that threshold. And that's where we need to be working, because the brain is deciding what is important, what's worthy of directing the attention to. So this 95% is really critical. The fact that so much of what goes on is happening below our conscious threshold. And that's why, as David Ogilvy quoted, customers don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. I'm sure we've all been in situations where we've conducted market research and we've gone away with the findings and we've rolled them out, we've delivered the product, or we've delivered the campaign, and we've not got the results we anticipated we would. Now, that isn't our customers being malicious. They're not trying to skew things for us in any way. It's just because they genuinely are not aware of why they do the things we do. And so that is where neuromarketing comes in. It's this segue between neuroscience, which is the knowledge, the insights, the understanding of what's going on in our brain, and marketing, being able to apply that together. And that really enables us to unlock customer attitudes, customer insights, customer behavior in a totally different way. And I'm afraid I've already used 6 neuromarketing techniques on you all today. So they're happening all the time. Here is a great example. This is one of the neuromarketing techniques I've used on you. Now, I don't know if I left this picture up, I could invite you to tell me what you think is the neuromarketing technique. However, what I will do is save you from that guesswork, because actually I'm going to show you what that neuromarketing technique is. And it's all based on the image I selected of David Ogilvy. Because one of the tools we use in neuromarketing is to look at eyes, and we use eye tracking glasses to see where people are actually looking. And we know that if we use an image like I've selected of David here, what will actually happen is your gaze will follow where David is looking. So rather than having an image of David looking directly at you, by using this image, I've encouraged you to look up to the text, because that's where David's looking. And here is the evidence to prove it. So we all know about kittens and cute babies, and how in someone's social media feed they will capture people's attention. This is an image which was created using eye tracking glasses. Excuse me. So it's a heat map. And where we've got reds and yellows is where most people's eyes were held for the longest amount of time. So the green areas were still glanced at, but the reds and the yellows show where people dwelled, where they spent the most time. So yeah, we can see that, great, tick. Using a baby's face captured people's attention. But look what happens if we change the angle of that baby. We've still got people's attention, but actually now we can see that that attention is not just on the baby's face. If I go back, it's not just on the baby's face, but now look, all that text you've so carefully written and crafted, it's actually being perceived for a much more meaningful amount of time. They're actually looking at the call to action down in the bottom right-hand corner as well. They're looking at the brand identity. So just by utilizing little tools and devices like this, neuromarketing is able to enable us to get really different results. So neuromarketing has arisen from insights that we've got through neuroscience. And these insights have come through a variety of ways. Firstly, the old ways. I hope you enjoyed your breakfast, everybody. This device on the left is probably everything you're hoping it's not going to be. It's literally a device for removing sections of the skull. So this would have been used to operate, if that's the word, on people who perhaps were having seizures, who actually more likely would have presented as being possessed. Back when these devices were first used, they were really a last resort. They would have been used on people to try and relieve pressure in the brain. What they would also have done is exposed the brain. So then it was only natural for people to see what happened, poked about a bit, see, what happens if you poke this area here, does anything change? It was not a great way to study science. It was not great for the patients, the recipients of these methods, and it really didn't teach us much at all. If you consider looking at a brain, if you had a live brain in front of you, it doesn't reveal much at all. If you think about if you've got a heart, it beats, it sort of pumps in front of you. If you've got lungs, you can see them inflating and deflating. A brain is busy and it's working away, but it reveals very little of that to you. So this device didn't get us very far at all. The second thing that we used to rely on is people like Phineas Cage. You can't do a neuroscience presentation without talking about Phineas, because he taught us a lot as a result of a horrific accident he experienced. That metal pole that he's pictured sitting next to actually went through his skull. So his job was to ram dynamite into a cliff face when they were building the railroads in America. And what happened one day, something went wrong, the dynamite sparked, it detonated, and that metal tamping rod went in through his left cheek, just under his eyeball, and went out through the top of his head and landed sort of 80 feet behind him. What is really incredible about this is the fact that Phineas was knocked out, but within a couple of minutes, he came back round again, and he sat up, and he got up, and he walked himself to where the cart was, and he got on the cart and asked to be driven to the doctor's, which was about 1.5 miles up the roadway, back to where all the sort of dormitory tents were for all the railroad workers. And he presented himself to the doctor and said he'd injured himself. Now, this is remarkable for someone to have had a metal rod that is about 3 centimeters in diameter go in through his brain and out the top, and still be able to function so well, was remarkable. However, Phineas was not the same person he was before the accident. He recovered. He had a period of quite severe illness, which was caused by the infection, because obviously this tamping rod was not sterile. So he did have about 12 days where he had incredibly high fevers. But after that, he recovered and healed remarkably well. But he was a very different person. And that's because the chunks of his brain that had been removed as this bar went through were some of those areas that deal with social interaction. They deal with moderating our behavior, so stopping us behaving in inappropriate ways. So without that part of his brain, Phineas was violent. He would swear a lot more. He was unpredictable, and he lost his job and sadly died about 9 years later. So these taught us a lot about what our brain does. Thankfully now, though, we have some far more efficient ways, far more effective ways. And the really exciting thing is these ways teach us about the brain while it is at work. So we can use a whole range of devices to study the brain while it is actually doing what it does. So while we are walking through the London Underground, I can put a headset on somebody and I can see where their attention is being drawn, and I can monitor the activity in their brain to see how they are responding to what they are seeing and hearing around them. So it's far less invasive than some of the original tools and devices, and it gives us the opportunity to really be able to understand that activity in the brain at a much more reliable, robust method. So what have we learnt? Well, the first thing we've learnt is that actually we have two halves to our brain. And I'm not talking about the left hemisphere, right hemisphere thing. I'm talking about the fact we have our new brain, or what we call our neocortex. This is the bit that you would see if you take a brain out of someone's skull. So it's all the sort of pink curly bit that you see on the top. We call this our new brain, even though it's over 3 million years old in terms of our evolutionary past. It is very clever, it's very sophisticated, but it is incredibly slow. And that's because it requires effort. So this is the part of our brain that when we go to sleep, it shuts down, it is off. It is something that we can control within reason, but it requires real conscious effort in order to do that. So when we were talking about our brain taking up 20% of the resources, This bit takes a huge amount of that. It takes a lot of energy to control it and to manage what we do. Contrary to that, we have what we call the old brain, or the reptilian brain, and that is the bit that sits underneath the neocortex. Now, this is much, much older, and it's much, much, much more limited. It doesn't have a vast array of things that it can do, but everything it does really quickly. And it is permanently on. So this is the bit that if you are asleep at night and there is a thud downstairs in your house, this is the bit that will alert you. This is the bit that will awake you. So it's permanently on. We can't control that. We can't choose that. And it takes no effort from us in order to do it. So we are not in charge of this. But these are the areas of our brain that are making huge amounts of decisions for us. They're influencing what we do and how we do things. These are the bits that build up that 95% of the decisions that we make. I want to very briefly give you a quick opportunity to feel these two parts of your brain in action. So firstly, I'm going to give you a chance to use that new brain, that really clever, really smart part of your brain. Okay, good luck. I don't know how you're getting on with that sum. If anybody needs to know, the answer is 595. But did you feel the weight of the process you had to go through? If I was doing this one, I start with sort of 350, 35 times 10 is 350. Park that. 35 times 7, well, 3 times 7 is 210. Add that on to the number I originally, it's a heavy process that you're using, and you can probably feel every bit of that process at work. This is your neocortex. This is sapping huge amounts of resources in order to be able to do that sum. The next example I'm going to show you will play to your reptilian brain, to the older part of your brain. Now, this won't work for many seconds, but it might just give you a chance to feel what that reptilian brain does for you. Okay? Your reptilian brain will very quickly be able to interpret something as being a threat, and it will respond. For a split second, that will create a physiological response in you. And that's what we measure in neuromarketing, are the physiological responses that your brain interprets from its world around it. Very quickly, the rational part of your brain will kick in and say, it's okay, it's just on the screen, he's not really coming for you. But it's just showing you how quickly these processes can kick in. And actually, the really exciting / scary part is how big the difference is between these two parts of our brains. So there was some research done where people were given 4 piles of cards in front of them, and each card in the piles had an amount of money listed on it. Some cards were in a colour that indicated the amount of money would be added on to your total, and in other other cards had a number which was written in a different colour, which indicated that amount would be taken away from your total. Participants were given £2,000, a fictitious £2,000 to start with, and the object of the game was to be in profit, so to have more money left at the end of the game by the time they turned over 100 cards. So quite simple, turn over cards randomly from any pile that you want to, and the aim is to be in profit. Now, what people realised is that actually somewhere between 40 to 50 cards in, people started to notice that there was a pattern. People could report the fact that there was actually a pattern. Some piles were giving more positive cards and other piles were giving more negative cards. So that was 40 to 50 cards in. However, when we were measuring people using neuroscience techniques, we could see that actually at around 11 cards, physiologically, we were responding. So physiologically, if we put our hand over a pile, which we knew at that subconscious level was going to give us negative cards, we became stressed. We responded at a physiological level. And yet we couldn't report that until 30 or even 40 cards later. So we knew at that subconscious level, we knew that some of these piles were bad news already. And the interesting thing is that when we look at specifically what's going on with the neurons in the brain, actually there's 3 times as many connections that go outwards from this reptilian midbrain out towards the neocortex than there are that come back in. So we can see that these are the primary drivers of our behaviours. These are the areas that determine what we do, and they then convey that message out. And this is happening time and time again. Over and over again, these processes happen. And they gradually become more like habit. They become faster. Those neural pathways connect and get quicker and quicker. And they're called heuristics. So if I ask you to clasp your hands like that, you'll have one way that feels natural to you. And you'll have one way that doesn't feel quite so natural. That's just a heuristic. That's a habit. If I ask you to fold your arms, you'll have one way that it goes really smoothly and one way that's a lot more awkward. That's because we have a heuristic. And very simply, it's one of the ways the brain works at its most efficient level, how it tries to operate and get the most out of that resource that it has and it consumes at such an incredible rate. So the first time we try and do something, if you think about the first time perhaps you learnt to drive a car, it's hard work. It's really hard work. It feels clunky. Nothing is quite going right. It's not very smooth. It's literally those neuronal pathways in your brain are literally trying to find the connections. It's like slashing through a jungle. But the more you do it, the more defined those connections get and the faster they get. And then ultimately, if those pathways are repeated, they become myelinated, which means they actually reach a stage where they become super fast. They become sort of the information superhighways. So this is what's happening within the brains of our consumers and our customers. And these are the areas that we need to be tapping into because these are ultra efficient. And emotions form a huge part of this. So I don't know if anybody's seen the Disney Pixar Inside Out movie. There is another one coming next year, apparently. These are a really fun way of being able to portray the key emotions that we have as human beings. And those emotions were first identified by a gentleman called Paul Ekman. And he travelled all over the world and studied people and the way they respond to situations and scenarios, and identified that there are actually 7 emotions that are core. They are universal to everybody. We show them in the same way, regardless of whether we are in a tribe in Papua New Guinea or whether we are in Asia or South America or Africa. Anywhere people show these emotions in the same way. What triggers the emotions will change, but the way we portray them does not. So I want to give you some examples of these emotions and how we use them in our marketing. So firstly, the emotion of happiness. Now this is one of the ways that we as human beings show that we are relaxed, that we are at ease, that we are comfortable, we are not a threat. So smiling faces are a very common device that are used in marketing campaigns. However, there are smiling faces and there are smiling faces. I want to please get you to start to really look at the images that you use in your marketing campaigns, and definitely scrutinize other images that you come across. Because remember that 11 million pieces of information that come into our brain every second that we are processing. We are incredibly good at deducing, interpreting, analysing people's cues and facial cues and body language. And so if we use an image which appears to us to be portraying a smiling person, but it actually falls short of that, the danger is our customers' brains will pick up on that. They will pick up on that uncertainty. Now, as you look at the image that I've chosen here, and this was taken from a recruitment company, you'll see a whole range of different smiles, and some of them appear more genuine and more comfortable than others. Your brain will have picked up on those. And it's incredible how this starts to influence the decisions we make. The research that Jess talked about that I did with Spotler a couple of years ago, we used an image to test out one of the landing pages that we wanted to get people's responses to, get people's brains responses to. And it was incredible. The image apparently was a smiling face. And yet, when I looked at what was going on inside people's brains, the overwhelming response I got was stress. So people were looking at an image of a smiling face and were feeling stressed. And when I went away and interrogated that and analysed it a bit more, it's because the smile was not authentic. People felt it was disingenuous. They started to doubt what they were seeing. So these are incredibly powerful. Second emotion, anger. This is really powerful. This is tremendously strong. And again, it's designed to convey a message to other people. And that message is basically, keep away, back off, do not approach me. I am not in a state that I want to have any kind of interaction. Something is interfering with what is important to me, and everybody needs to know about that. Now, I don't know how many of you are going to be playing board games over the next couple of months. It's quite often a Christmas tradition. I'm sure we've all been there with this board game and with Monopoly. This is probably the moment before my brother would flip the whole board up if he was losing that badly. But anger is a really strong emotion, and looking at somebody who's experiencing this emotion will trigger off similar responses within our brains. So it's really good that we understand the impact on our customers of presenting images which convey these emotions, because that is fundamentally what emotions are there for, is to communicate to other people around them. And here's one. Oh my goodness, how many times are we going to see this over the next few months? This is an emotion that we will see in a lot of adverts, particularly for aftershaves and perfumes. Okay, this is for a drink, but you will see them all over the place over the next couple of months. And it's contempt. It's a really strong emotion that, again, is one of those core 7 that Paul Ekman identified. And contempt actually is a distancing emotion. So although here we've got David raising a glass as if to say, you know, cheers, aren't we convivial? Actually, no, we're not. Contempt is an emotion that distances you from me. So think about that whenever you see it coming up in advertising campaigns over the next few weeks. So it's important that we understand what these emotions are doing. And when we look at the emotions and when we see them, our brain will be interpreting them in some very exciting ways. So when I'm studying what's going on in people's brains, these are the kind of readings I will be getting. So this is taken from, in fact, you can see just behind me here, one of the headsets that I use. And this produces these kind of outputs. And each one of those is information received from a sensor, which is on that headset. and the precise location of those sensors is mapped so I can get responses of different activity in different parts of the brain. And by reading some responses like this, I'm able to start to understand the way the brain is processing the information from the world around it. But this is hard to make it really meaningful. That headset will give me 1,000 readings per second from each of those 14 sensors. So that is a huge amount of data very quickly, but it's not easy to make it meaningful. So what we then do is apply some algorithms to it, which make it much more meaningful. And so here you can see that what we've got is actually some key aspects of the brain function that have been deduced from that same reading. Where you see the red vertical lines, these are the different markers that I put in place. So every time the participant was exposed to a new piece of content, the marker is laid down. So that way I'm able to isolate and analyze particular responses to each of the different formats they saw. So it starts to get much more meaningful. And looking at this, you can straight away see that some of them elicited more positive, more obvious responses than other ones did. However, I still think one of the best readings I ever took was actually doing some of the research for Spotler. And this was with it was an organization we went out to do the research with. And as we did the research, I was asking each of the participants if we could take a photo of them wearing the headset for social media. And in this particular organization, everybody said no. But also, everybody said, Pip will do that. Pip won't mind. Yeah, Pip's great at that sort of thing. Pip will do it. When it gets to Pip's turn, she'll do it for you, no problem. So every participant that came, I looked at their name, still wasn't Pip. Again, I asked people, would you be happy to? No, I'm not, but Pip will. So I began to think Pip was, I don't know, an invisible friend almost. But finally, Pip arrived and I got to meet Pip. So we did the research in the same way that we had done for everybody else. And at the end of it, I said to Pip, oh, by the way, do you mind if I take your photo for social media purposes? And Pip went, no, that's no problem at all. But Pip was still wearing the headset. And I thought it was fabulous that while Pip had said to me, no, that's no problem at all, this is what her brain did. So you can see there were a few brief moments before she managed to regain that control, where everything was just screaming in a whole host of different directions, and she just captured it, got it back under control, and said, no, that's fine. So bear Pip in mind anytime you might be taking a photo for social media. So it's really important that we understand what is going on inside people's brains when we're talking about emotions and when we're addressing some of the emotional areas of our communications. I've got a couple of examples here that are again going to trigger off some different emotions. So firstly, sadness. Now, I don't know how you feel as you look at that, as that particular advert, but the chances are, if I was looking at your brain, you would trigger off a number of responses to that. And sad is a very common emotion that is generated by charities. So again, you might see a few examples of those who are coming up, desperately trying to raise funds to provide for people, get people off the streets. Obviously we've got war zones. Lots and lots of charities use this sadness to try and engage a response from us. And then there's this one, which is surprise. Surprise is a really interesting emotion to work with, and I'll come back to that one in a moment. This is a And this is an example that does the rounds on LinkedIn quite regularly. But as a more up-to-date example, I don't know if anybody's seen the Ocado advertisements on TV where somebody is doing something in everyday life and it triggers them to make a note to order something. So in this particular example here, somebody appears to be on a first date, and what actually happens is the person in the first date, the gentleman, is talking on and on and on about himself and how great he is, and it reminds her that she needs to buy some waffles. So it's that element of surprise that has been utilised in that campaign. The exciting thing is when we actually look at what is going on inside brains, we start to be able to deliberately manage some of these emotions. And I just want to give you a sense of where this is taking us to next. So here I'm showing you each of those 7 core emotions, and plotted for each of them I have given you figures which show them on 3 different scales. We call these their PAD score. So the P, which is the gold one, stands for pleasure. That's the gold line on your graph. The teal one is the A. That stands for arousal. So that is how fired up you are, how pumped you are that you're going to respond. And the D, the navy blue one, that stands for dominated. So it's a measure of how much control you think you have. Now, the interesting thing is when you look at these emotions, they give us very different outputs on these scores. And what we need to start thinking about is actually how we utilize this. So if we understand what sort of situation, what sort of state somebody might be in, we can then look to address that and change that to make our communications more effective. So, starting off with anger. The thing that we need to be most mindful of with anger is this incredibly high arousal level. If someone is angry, their blood is pumping, they are fired up. This is why we get road rage and things. People are angry and they need to vent it, they need to let it out. We as marketers cannot work with people who are angry unless we bring that arousal level down. They are blind to anything we present to them. They are literally shut down from anything we might communicate to them. If we deal with customer services, if we've got angry customers, angry clients, you cannot start to do anything to support them or to make them offers until you bring that arousal level down. So, as an emotion, anger serves a really strong purpose, but for us as marketers, it's incredibly hard to get seen and get noticed and be visible when you've got someone who is in that intense aroused state. If we've got people who are experiencing contempt, or if we have created a situation where you've got someone experiencing contempt, they are not enjoying it. So it's a really interesting emotion that quite often we feel that contempt means someone feels superior, but they are not enjoying it. So for this one, where we need to target our activity is to raise that pleasure up. We need to get them feeling good, enjoying life. So that is where we would need to focus on contempt. With disgust, again, we've got that arousal. Disgust, remember, is designed to be something that conveys a strong message. If I've eaten something and it's contorted my face, children are brilliant. Give children vegetables or make them suck a lemon or something, and none of us can help it. It's part of what we do to convey that all is not well and to warn other people around us. So we are naturally very physiologically responsive, and we've got to get that down if we're going to be able to work with people. Fear is a really interesting one. Lots of marketing campaigns use fear as their basis. However, with fear, we are very often left feeling out of control. We feel like we've got no options. So that is where we need to go. If we're using fear as part of a marketing campaign, we've absolutely got to pull that back so people know they've got control, they've got somewhere that they can go. Happiness. Happiness is, it's great. It's what a lot of people aspire to, but actually, happiness as a state is really inactive. We're not motivated to do anything or change anything because life's great. We're happy. Why would you? So actually, we've got to work hard to get people's arousal levels up for happiness. Sadness, again, similar to fear, it's that feeling of hopelessness and being out of control that we've got to target there. And then it comes to surprise. Now, surprise is a beautiful tool for us to use in marketing because you can see what it does. It neutralizes everything. It gives you a blank canvas. I don't know if you felt that when I showed you the dentistry advert, but what happens is you read it and you kind of laugh on the inside, maybe on the outside, and then you pause. And while that's happening, we as marketers have a really strong opportunity to get our message communicated. So surprise is a fabulous tool that we can use. And I just want to finish by giving you a sense of where these emotions are being used in marketing at the moment. I don't know if many of you are using digital out of home or out of office boards at the moment, but they have tremendous potential. And one of the things that I'm working with a company at the moment is that their digital out of office boards are they're fitted with cameras which have sensors on them. And for a while, those cameras have been used to kind of scan the area, the environment around them, and work out who is there and change the advertisements that are shown according to the demographic in front of them. So, for instance, a lot of these boards are used in gyms, leisure centres. There are a lot of them now popping up on the high street. And what they would do is use that camera to look around them and to see, we might have, at 10:30 in the morning in a cafe, you might have 76% females who are in there. And that then means that they are more inclined to show advertisements that would target that proportion of the population. However, what we are now doing is exploring the fact that these cameras, the sensors, are also able to pick up emotions. So they can read people's emotions from facial cues. And we are starting to be able to change the content of the advertising campaigns that we produce, change the language, change the images, so that we can really align them with the emotions that people are presenting. So one of the examples that we trialed was in a football club, and we had a very narrow proportion of the population, and the team obviously didn't do well because the emotions as they came out were very angry, very hostile, and very sad. Now, if we'd shown an advertising campaign which was very upbeat, very positive, very high energy, that absolutely would have switched those the football crowd as they walk past. It would have switched them off completely. But by changing the colour palette and by changing the language, we were able to create a much more impactful and engaging campaign for them. So this is where we are starting to see some of this emotional potential come all the way through from neuroscience right through into digital technology platforms today. So I just want to finish by saying, please love your brain, be immensely proud of it. It does a huge amount for you. It is incredibly busy getting on with things, but the real magic happens underneath what we are consciously aware of. So try wherever possible to make sure that you're marketing to that reptilian brain, to that one which is analysing the environment around it and working out what's important. It's a fundamental sort of survival instinct that has. So understanding the emotions and how they communicate and how they convey information to that gives us a great opportunity to be able to support the brains of our customers and consumers to help them identify that we are significant and that they can therefore help us to reach that conscious threshold. It is an exciting area of marketing to be involved in, and it's something that you can use straight away from the images that you select, being able to understand why they may have connection and resonance, and be able to deliberately choose them to create an impression and an association that you want within the brains of your audience. I'm going to put that slide in there. That's just got my contact details on. If anybody wants to follow me, or please, on my website, I always have, each month I have a piece of research that's going on. At the moment, that is about memory. So please do visit that page on my website if you would like to get involved in that. Otherwise, I hope you found today's sessions useful. And I'll pass back to Jess now, but I'm happy to answer any questions in a few moments.
Thank you, Katie. Just, yeah, absolutely fascinating, isn't it? All of it. It's pretty mind-blowing. Before we move on to questions, so guys, please pop your questions into the question thread if you do have any, and then at the end we will, just in a couple of minutes, we'll make some time for this. So I just wanted to mention that for all of our attendees on the webinar today, we're offering a 2-week free trial, 14-day free trial of our website visitor identification platform, which is called SpotlerLeads. It's basically a tracking code that you pop on your website, and it gives you the insight into companies and individuals browsing on your website, what they're looking at, how intent they are to buy, so how sales ready they are, which is a really useful tool for both sales and marketing teams. It also allows you to identify leads that are inbound coming to you on your website, what content they're interested in, so you can tailor your sales pitch to them. So if you are interested in a free trial for that, please just get in touch afterwards. We'll be sending the slides and the recording out, so please just reply to that email and we'll send it to you. Okay, ready for some questions, Katie?
Always ready.
The first one that we had come in quite early on was, how do we get both parts of the brain to speak to each other? How do we?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the good news is that they do kind of speak to each other. However, the loudest, shoutiest voice is that reptilian brain. That is the one that can cut through everything else that happens. Now, so for instance, if we're doing normal market research and we ask somebody why they have made the decision that they have, what we can see happening within the brain is that they use that top layer, that neocortex, to kind of retrospectively justify why they've done what they did. So we can give answers about why we think we chose that. But what we will see is that that doesn't line up with actually the response that's going on in the brain. So in some ways they do speak to each other, but I'm afraid, yeah, maybe they speak different languages or something. The real weight, the real strength is in what's going on in that midbrain. So sadly, the connections are there, but they are not as strong as we would like them to be. And particularly, most of the connections are from that middle brain going out. So it's sort of, the decision is made here, and then it is passed outwards. So yeah, sadly, whether there are neuroscientists working on that, trying to align more of that information. I mean, I don't know if anybody's seen the film Lucy, which starred Morgan Freeman. Was it Scarlett Johansson, I think, as well? But yeah, this sense of, actually, if we could control more of this, if we had a way of being able to make that a two-way street, it might really quite significantly change the way we utilize our brains. At the moment, we don't have that. What we are doing is learning about everything that's going on within these different areas, and we can see where the pathways connect and where they join up so that they do actually speak. But yeah, it's a long way short of what we might like it to be at this stage.
Fab, thank you. So another question here. Lots of our marketing includes photos of men because that's our demographic. Do you look at how men and women react differently to seeing a man or a woman in marketing, or does it really depend on the facial expression rather than the gender?
Great question. Thank you for that.
Mm.
Yes, yeah, we do. We absolutely do. And we can see that the way male and female brains respond to the same image can be really quite different. In fact, I'm delighted that you're asking this question, because there is a whole area, a sort of sub area of neuromarketing that looks at gender and looks at how we need to change things if we are particularly trying to appeal to one gender or another. Um, Now, so yes, we do look at the differences. So we find that if you've got a male image and you're trying to appeal to men, the primary thing you've got to be aware of is that actually men looking at images of men will start to assess them on a slightly competitive level. So things like some of the emotions like contempt and anger will be far stronger, whereas men looking at images of women don't feel threatened in quite that same way. So yes, you're right. You need to be very selective and very mindful of which images you use, and they need to be ones which are very unaggressive, non-confrontational, perhaps a bit aspirational might be a good way to go with those.
Mhm. Okay, fab. Um, I know you talked about the market to the reptilian brain, but which
Yeah.
emotion is the best to interact with within the emails based on your chart?
um, so a lot of that, I'm afraid, is going to depend on what it is that you're trying to convey. So what the offer is. Um, Surprise gives you the best chance to take control. So if we're, was the question particularly about email? Did you say at the end of that, Jess?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So email is an environment where we have no sense of where people are going to be when they open those emails. They might be standing in a packed tube train, scrolling through emails on their phone. They might be sitting on a terrace in Italy somewhere with a glass of wine. We've got very little control over that. So what we need to try and do is control the emotion. And so surprise is a brilliant way of giving us the best opportunity to do that. Obviously, once we've got that surprise, we then need to choose where we take them next, depending on what it is that we're trying to convey, what it is that we are trying to promote or to sell to them. So there isn't a one size fits all. It's very much about what your product is, what your offer is, what their pain is, what their biggest need is. But you've got to be able to provide, if you think about those pad scores, you've got to be able to provide something which motivates them, which gives them that arousal, which gives them that determination to click on a link or to open up an attachment or something like that, and actually enable them to feel that they've got some control in this, they've got some influence. So those two you want to be really quite solid. The happiness one, the pleasure one isn't really going to affect it that much. It's much more about the motivation and that arousal and the ability to feel that they've got control.
Okay, fab. Another question here. Is it more impactful to have images of people in marketing material for emails or social rather than images not containing people or faces?
Yeah, there is a particular part of our brain called the fusiform area, which is designed to find faces. That's what it does. It recognizes faces because we as humans are inherently social. So faces are incredibly meaningful to us. And this was one of the things that came out again in the research that I did with Spotler, was actually looking at the faces. And if you use one of those images which has lots of different people in it, so similar to that recruitment advert I showed you, the brain actually starts to lose focus because it can't give attention to all of those different faces. So yes, faces are very, very important to us. And so they will have an impact and they will create a social connection in a way that actually an image of objects just won't. There is an interesting crossover. And I did some research on this for the Dove brand, which is called pareidolia. And it's where we see objects but find faces in them. So I'm sure you've seen the examples of you cut a pepper in half and it looks like there's a face inside it. Or some cars these days, the two headlights and the radiator grille look like they're sort of faces. Or people have them on the front of washing machines, things like that, where the dials actually start to look like a face. This is because that fusiform area of our brain is naturally looking for faces and it wants to create a connection. And I did some research on my website probably about February, March time, using all of these and actually overlaying them to emotions. And so asking people what emotions they thought these inanimate objects were portraying. And it's incredible how we get sucked into naturally giving these inanimate objects emotions because of the positioning of these individual features that we perceive as being a face. So you don't have to use a human face, but anything that has that sort of facial symbolism in it will activate very strong areas of your brain. So if you're going to do it, make sure that you're conveying an emotion, even if they are objects which are construed to create a facial pattern.
Yeah. I think we've got a couple more. Which emotion does excitement fit into? Happiness and surprise, or fear? How do we get people excited about events?
Yeah, great question again. Excitement is very, very close to fear. So it's where you've got incredible levels of arousal. And when I'm using the headsets to measure people's responses, when we get really strong responses to arousal, that's one of the things I need to look at is it a positive arousal, which is excitement, or is it a negative arousal, which is fear? Because it's that pumped, it's that I'm ready to do something response that we get. So yeah, it is actually much closer to fear and even anger. I mean, the high arousal levels of anger. So excitement is closest to fear rather than happiness. Because if you think with happiness, we aren't motivated to change. The arousal level is incredibly low. Whereas with excitement, there is that, there is something coming. We're excited about it. You've got a higher level of that motivation and arousal with it. So I love that question. Thank you. But the answer is, yeah, we're closer to fear of those two.
Wow. Okay. I think this is the last one. Let me just check. Can you portray emotion in marketing without using images of people?
Yeah, you absolutely can. So, language is a great way of being able to portray emotion. You can actually use just colour to start to portray some of these emotions as well. However, the difficulty we have is that the written word relies on that neocortex. So you need to get to the level where the neocortex is engaged before someone starts to read your text. An image is much more likely for that reptilian brain to see it, to focus on it, to understand the emotion, and then to allocate the attention that it needs to then enable someone to read the text. If we are relying on them just reading the text, we're going to get a lot fewer responses because we haven't got that initial selection in our favour. I don't know if that made sense. If we think about the 11 million bits of information your brain is processing, there's loads of stuff coming in all the time. And written word is hard. It takes a lot of resource and capacity. So if we're relying on our reptilian brain to read that written word, we've got to do something really clever with the fonts, or with the size of the text or the colors of it, to get the attention in the same way that using an image of a face would.
Okay, fab. Well, thank you, Katie. That's all the questions. So if there are any more that come in after, please feel free to either pop them to Spotler, or you will have Katie's direct contact details as well on the slide. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much, Katie, for your time. As always, incredible presentation. Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining. We hope you have a great rest of the week. Hopefully you've got some useful tools and tips from that webinar that you can implement in your marketing almost immediately. So thank you very much.